The dry sound of a slap echoed inside the plane. Marta, the white flight attendant, with a sneer, stared at Carla, the black passenger. But she had no idea who stood before her, and what came next would change everything forever. The air conditioning hummed in the narrow first-class aisle. Carla adjusted the strap of her leather executive suitcase, her fingers gliding over the polished metal of the buckle. The overhead compartment was open, waiting. She raised her arms, muscles tense beneath her impeccable navy blazer. Marta's boot heel hit the floor. Kleck, 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 calculated, measured steps. The flight attendant stopped half a meter away, crossed her arms, and tilted her head. The smile on her lips didn't reach her eyes. "Can't you follow simple instructions?" The voice cut through the air like glass. "Bag under the seat, not in the overhead bin." Marta's eyes ran up and down Carla's body. They lingered on her curly hair tied in an elegant bun, her dark skin contrasting with her white shirt and the lack of any ostentatious jewelry, a cold, systematic assessment. All around, white executives looked up from their screens. A gray-haired man lowered his reading glasses. A blonde woman stopped flipping through her magazine. Everyone was watching. Everyone was judging. The hallway had become an arena. "First time flying?" Marta asked, loud enough for the others to hear. "Some people need to learn that having enough money for a ticket doesn't mean they have the skills to fly." Carla took a deep breath. The cold air of the plane filled her lungs. "It's not about you," she thought, remembering her grandmother's voice. "It's about their fear of who you might become." For a second, she saw herself at 8, holding her mother's hand in a department store. The white saleswoman followed them through the aisles, eyes suspicious, the same tension, the same drama. But she was no longer the scared girl. She was Carla Santos, 34, a graduate of USP and a postgraduate at Harvard. Every scar had turned into strength. "I apologize," Carla said, her voice as calm as still water. "I didn't mean to bother you." She lowered the suitcase slowly, controlling every movement. There was no rush. There was no shame. "I just wanted to respect everyone's space." The gray-haired man murmured something to his wife. The word polite reached Carla's ears, spoken as if in surprise. Marta watched Carla settle into the seat, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. And there, in that tense, first-class silence, a confrontation began that neither of them could have imagined where it would end. The slap echoed like dry thunder in the silence of the cabin. Carla's skin burned, not just where Marta's fingers had touched, but all over her face, running down her neck like liquid fire. Her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. The roar of the plane's engines grew louder. The world spun in slow motion. Carla blinked once, twice, 3 times. The surrounding passengers turned like an audience in a Roman amphitheater, some with their phones already raised, others pretending to read, but all watching, waiting. The spectacle of black humiliation always drew crowds. Marta took 2 steps back, but kept her chin high. Her lips curved into a smile that blended satisfaction and contempt. It was the smile of someone who had just put someone in their place. "Now you've learned," he murmured, loud enough for the passengers in the front row to hear. "This is how you teach respect." A middle-aged executive adjusted his glasses and returned to his laptop screen as if nothing had happened. A platinum-haired woman coughed gently, looking away. 2 men in suits whispered something about standards of behavior. Carla's isolation materialized like an invisible dome around her. Carla closed her eyes for a moment and felt Grandma Conceiçon's hand rest on her shoulder. Her voice was hoarse, like someone who'd shouted too much in her life. "Daughter, when they hit you, it's not your skin that hurts. It's their pride that bleeds." She remembered her mother coming home from work with her uniform torn, whispering about her boss who had crossed the line. She remembered herself at 15, being followed by security at the mall, her white friends walking freely while she carried the burden of suspicion. But she also remembered graduation, her first paycheck, the framed photo at home, her in cap and gown, a smile that defied all statistics. Every no she'd heard had become fuel. Every closed door, a lesson in where to find windows. Carla opened her eyes slowly. Her voice was low, controlled, each word measured like gold. I apologize for the misunderstanding. It wasn't submission. It was strategy. The voice he'd learned to use in boardrooms full of white men who doubted his every word. Marta frowned, expecting pleas or shouts. But Carla just sat down, adjusted her posture, and folded her hands in her lap. I appreciate your guidance. What Marta didn't know was that women like Carla don't break at the first impact. They grow stronger in silence. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of judgment. Carla felt dozens of eyes like spotlights on her skin. The air conditioning still hummed, but now it seemed to carry human whispers, half-words, muffled laughter. In seat 2A, Roberto adjusted his gold-framed glasses and leaned toward his wife, Helena. His lips moved in a whisper, but the volume was calculated to be heard. In the next row, two Petrobras executives exchanged knowing glances, the kind that said, "Did you see that?" without needing words. A young woman in her 20s, with brushed blonde hair, discreetly raised her cell phone. The screen reflected off the window for a second before she lowered the device, pretending to scroll through social media. "I wonder how she got that ticket," Helena murmured to Roberto, her voice low but audible. Nowadays, anyone can buy first class." Roberto nodded, returning to the tablet screen where he read news about the invasion of public universities. His fingers drummed on the coffee table, marking a rhythm of disapproval. Across the aisle, Marcus, a 40-year-old black lawyer, lowered his head over a labor lawsuit. His shoulders hunched slightly. He recognized the scene, having been the protagonist a few times before. But today, he was safe in his seat, 3C, invisible enough not to be the next target. Lucia, a black flight attendant, stopped at the end of the aisle. Her hands trembled imperceptibly as she held the champagne tray. For 2 seconds, her eyes met Carla's. A silent, ancestral recognition. But Lucia quickly looked away and continued to economy class. Carla observed every reaction as if deciphering a familiar code. It was the same social algorithm that had followed her since childhood. Her dark skin as a public invitation to scrutiny, every gesture analyzed, every right questioned. He remembered his high school math teacher. "Carla, are you sure you didn't cheat? That grade doesn't match your profile." From the bank manager who asked for 3 proofs of income for a card he would approve for any white customer, to the doorman at the building where he worked who always forgot his name even after 2 years. "They don't hate you," echoed Grandma Conceiçon's voice in her mind. "They hate the freedom you represent." Carla felt something harden in her chest. It wasn't anger. Anger was a luxury women like her couldn't afford in spaces like that. It was determination. Cold. Precise. Deadly. Marta returned to her post near the galley, but couldn't resist one last stab. She turned to Carla with a venomous smile. "I hope the rest of the flight passes without any more incidents." The word incidents was pronounced as if Carla were a technical problem to be solved. From the back of the cabin, Lucia whispered to another flight attendant, "That's not right, Anna." Anna just shrugged. "It's not our problem." In that first-class air court, Carla discovered that complicit silence hurts more than any slap. Carla closed her eyes, and the plane disappeared. In its place were the smell of disinfectant and the echo of heels on cold marble. She was 8 years old, holding her mother, Dona Neuza, calloused hand in the mirrored lobby of a downtown São Paulo office building. It was past midnight. The security guards looked suspiciously as Nusa showed her cleaning lady's badge. Carla carried a battered backpack with her homework and a snack wrapped in aluminum foil. She would spend another night dozing in an office chair while her mother cleaned up after the executives during the day. Carla, 16, her school uniform impeccable even though it was second-hand, her hair tied back with a regular elastic band, sat in the municipal library until the last minute before closing. The business school books were too heavy to carry, so she copied entire pages by hand, filling cheap notebooks with expensive dreams. And then came another flashback. The internship interview at the multinational company. Carla, 19, blazer borrowed from her cousin, resume printed at the local print shop. The interviewer, Mr. Martins, looked more at her Cidade Tiradentes address than her college grades. "Are you sure you'll be able to get here every day?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "It's far from your area, your region, as if it were another country. As if people like her couldn't cross the bridge that separated the outskirts from the business center. At 25, already graduated, remembering her first meeting as a trainee, the only black person in the room, the only woman, the director introducing her, "This is Carla, our new diversity." The word diversity, pronounced as if it were a favor, not a right earned with blood in the eye. On the plane, Carla took a deep breath. Every humiliation had been a building block in the making of who she had become. Her mother working 3 jobs to pay for her private college education. Her grandmother Conceição selling coconut candy at the train station to buy her first college textbooks. "Daughter," grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, "they will try to convince you that you don't deserve to be where you are. But remember, every step you climb, you carry us with you." Carla discreetly touched the small pendant around her neck, a cowrie shell that had belonged to her great-grandmother, a freed slave who learned to read in her 60s. Generations of black women had fought for her to be in that first-class seat, not as a guest, as the master of her own destiny. Dona Nusa's voice came back clear in the last conversation they had. "Daughter, when you enter those places full of important people, remember that you didn't get there to ask for permission. You got there because you earned it." And then, more quietly, holding his daughter's hands, "If one day they try to humiliate you, you take a deep breath and ask, how many mothers like me had to break their backs for this girl to get here?" Carla smiled in the darkness of her closed eyelids. The answer was simple. 3 generations of warrior women. When she opened her eyes back on the plane, Carla was no longer a passenger being humiliated. She was the answer to the prayers of all the women who came before her. Marta returned with firmer steps, stiletto heels marking territory on the gray carpet. This time, she brought reinforcements. Anna, another white flight attendant with blonde hair tied in a stiff bun, followed 2 steps behind like a soldier in formation. The drinks cart creaked softly between them, metal against metal creating an ominous soundtrack. The plane's artificial light shone on Marta's face, creating angular shadows that accentuated her disdainful expression. She stopped right next to Carla's seat, invading her personal space with calculated precision. Her overpowering citrus perfume mingled with the leather smell of the seats, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere. Roberto and Helena, in the front row, discreetly leaned back. The man even removed one of his headphones. It was obvious. They were expecting a spectacle. "You know," Marta began, her voice loud enough to carry across 3 rows, "there's a standard of behavior we expect in first class." She gestured theatrically, like a teacher lecturing a problem student on civility. "Some people—" The pause was intentional, his eyes scanning Carla's body. "Some people think that having money for the ticket means having the education to fly with us." Anna chuckled, covering her mouth with her hand in a mock gesture of discretion. 2 executives in row 4 exchanged knowing smiles. A gray-haired woman nodded approvingly, as if Marta were performing a public service. Lucia, the black flight attendant, appeared at the end of the aisle carrying pillows. For a second, she hesitated. Her fingers tightened on the white fabric of the pillows until her knuckles turned white. But then she lowered her head and disappeared into the curtain separating the classes. Carla felt something cold spread through her chest. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. She knew the choreography, public humiliation as a spectacle, violence disguised as politeness, social lynching disguised as order. "When they attack you in packs," echoed the voice of Grandmother Conceição, "it's because they've discovered that they're no match for you alone." Carla's hand slid down to the small shell on her neck. 3 generations of women had faced worse humiliations and survived. Her great-grandmother, who was beaten for learning to read. Her grandmother, who was kicked out of restaurants for sitting at white people's tables. Her mother, who cleaned the offices of the same men who now tried to deny her an equal place. Each had planted a seed of resistance. Now it was Carla's turn to reap the harvest. Marta leaned in slightly, lowering her tone to a venomous whisper that still carried far. "Between you and me, dear, don't you think it would be more comfortable in economy class? There you would feel more at home." The word house was pronounced as an insult. Anna completed the attack. "That's why there's class separation, right? Everyone in their place." Roberto, from the front row, muttered loud enough to be heard. Finally, someone said the obvious. Carla took a deep breath and smiled, the kind of smile powerful women reserve for moments before they change the game forever. The silence that followed was thick as fog. Carla moved with the elegance of someone who was never in a hurry, each gesture measured, calculated. Her hands descended to her Italian leather bag, fingers gliding over the gold zipper with the same delicacy as someone caressing silk. The metallic sound of the zipper cut through the air like a sharp blade. All eyes turned to her hands, hands that had trembled cleaning offices with her mother, hands that had been injured carrying heavy books, hands that now held power. She pulled out a black leather briefcase, the kind that cost more than many people's monthly salary. The sound of leather on leather echoed like an ancient war drum. Roberto adjusted his glasses. Helena stopped pretending to read the magazine. Anna took a half-step back without realizing it. The atmosphere shifted like the wind before a storm. Marta, who seconds before had dominated the scene with her performative arrogance, sensed something different in the air. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but Carla's demeanor had completely transformed. "What are you doing?" Marta asked, but her voice sounded less confident than before. Carla didn't respond immediately. She opened the folder with deliberately slow movements. The papers inside were organized with military precision, each document a bullet in the gun she was about to fire. Roberto leaned forward, curiosity overcoming prejudice. Helena lowered her magazine completely. Even Marcus, the black lawyer who had been feigning invisibility until then, looked up from the case file he was reading. From the back of the plane, Lucia reappeared. This time, instead of looking away, she remained standing in the aisle as if sensing something historic was about to happen. Carla felt the weight of all the women in her lineage at that moment. The great-grandmother who was whipped for daring to dream of freedom. The grandmother who cleaned houses so her daughter could study. The mother who held her tongue in humiliation so she could get to this point. "The time has come, daughter," whispered the ancient voice in his mind. "It's not just for you. It's for all of us." She remembered the first time she stepped into a meeting room as an intern at 20. How the men looked at her as if she were a casting mistake. How she had to prove herself 3 times more than any white male colleague. How every no had become fuel. Every closed door had turned into iron determination. Now, at 34, she was no longer the scared girl who needed to prove she deserved to be there. She was the storm. Carla looked up slowly, meeting Marta's gaze with the precision of a sniper. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who built empires from scratch. Do you know who you're talking to? It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of war. Marta swallowed hard, but tried to maintain her composure. With someone who is causing problems on my flight. Carla smiled. It wasn't a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone about to turn the tables. Your flight? Sometimes power doesn't shout. It whispers before it roars. Carla pulled from her briefcase a gold executive badge that shone like a small sun under the LED lights. The metal reflected not only light, but power. Power earned drop by drop of sweat, humiliation overcome by humiliation. Her initials engraved in elegant script, C.S., Chief Executive Officer, Aero National Corporation. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the roar of the engines seemed audible. Roberto took off his glasses completely, wiping the lenses with nervous movements. Helena let the magazine slip from her fingers, pages whispering against the leather of the seat. Anna, the flight attendant who had been giggling before, now had a face the color of paper. Marta stared at the badge as if seeing a ghost. Her pupils dilated, her breathing became irregular. The world she knew, where she held power over people like that, had just crumbled in a matter of seconds. That's impossible, Marta stammered, her voice breaking on the first syllable. But Carla wasn't in a hurry. She turned the badge slowly, letting everyone read each letter, each symbol of authority. Aero National, the country's largest airline, responsible for 60% of domestic flights, the same company that paid Marta's salary. Roberto whispered to Helena, but this time his tone wasn't one of superiority. It was one of contained panic. My God, Helena, Aero National is our biggest consulting client. Marcus, the black lawyer, finally lifted his head fully. A slight smile formed at the corner of his mouth. He recognized that moment, the power shift he himself had experienced a few times, when he revealed his law degree to those who treated him as a suspect. Lucia took 2 steps forward. For the first time during the flight, her shoulders straightened, as if Carla's presence had given her permission to occupy her space with dignity. Carla felt a deep calm spreading through her body. It wasn't revenge. It was ancestral justice manifesting. Every slap her great-grandmother received, every no her grandmother heard, every door that closed on her mother, it had all converged on that exact moment. You are not alone, daughter, echoed the voice of Grandmother Conceição. We are all here with you. It was true. Carla carried in her heart the strength of all the black women who came before, who dreamed of days like that, who planted seeds of resistance so she could reap the fruits of power. Not power to humiliate, power to transform. She discreetly touched the cowrie shells around her neck. Her great-grandmother's amulet seemed to pulse with ancient energy. Carla put the badge back in her briefcase with the same elegance with which she had revealed it. When she spoke, her voice carried centuries of dignity. My name is Carla Santos. I've been CEO of Aero National for 6 months. She paused carefully, letting the information sink in. And you, Marta, he read the name on the flight attendant's badge. Marta Oliveira, you just physically attacked your top boss. The word maximum echoed through the cabin as a final sentence. Anna tried to intervene, her voice trembling. Mrs. Santos, we didn't know. Carla interrupted her with a gentle gesture of her hand. They didn't know what, exactly? That I was a CEO? Or that I deserved basic respect as a human being? If you've ever witnessed or experienced situations like this, leave your story in the comments, because every story of resistance strengthens those who are still fighting. The cockpit door opened with a soft metallic click. Captain Eduardo Silva emerged from the cockpit, his uniform impeccable, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders gleaming under the first-class lights. His steps were measured, authoritative, 52 years of experience in civil and military aviation. He stopped in the middle of the aisle, his eyes scanning the scene. Marta standing, pale as a ghost, Anna leaning back against the drinks cart, passengers with their necks craned like curious giraffes. But when his eyes met Carla's, something changed in his expression. "Mrs. Santos." His voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "Carla Santos from Aero National?" The recognition was instant. Eduardo had attended the new CEO's induction meeting 6 months earlier. He'd seen her photos in trade papers and read about her meteoric career in the company magazine. The transformation was cinematic. Roberto, who minutes earlier had whispered about behavioral standards, now cowered in his chair like a cornered animal. Helena let out a whispered, "My God," her hand covering her mouth in belated horror. The two Petrobras executives looked at each other with barely concealed panic. One of them pulled out his cell phone, probably calculating how many contracts might be at risk. The other nervously adjusted his tie, sweat forming on his forehead despite the frigid air conditioning. "Captain," Marta tried to explain, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. We didn't know she was—" "That she was what?" Eduardo interrupted her with cutting coldness. "That she was a person worthy of basic respect? Or that she was my supreme boss?" Lucia took 3 decisive steps down the aisle. For the first time on the entire flight, she walked with her spine straight, chin held high. She stopped beside Carla, not as an employee, but as a silent sister in arms. Carla observed the collective metamorphosis with the serenity of someone who knows the script. It wasn't a surprise, it was confirmation. She'd experienced it dozens of times. The instantaneous change in treatment when power revealed itself, the respect that should have been unconditional but only arrived upon presentation of credentials. "Did you see, daughter?" Grandma Conceiçon's voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't their skin that changed. It was their cowardice that revealed itself. Carla remembered her mother telling her about her boss, who mistreated her until she discovered she had a degree in education. She recalled her own experience as an intern, ignored until her exemplary grades at Harvard were discovered. Respect arrived too late, conditioned, and shameful. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just Carla, the girl from the outskirts who'd made her own. She was Carla Santos, CEO, carrying the power to transform the system that had oppressed her for so long. Eduardo turned to Marta, his voice full of military authority. "Commissioner Oliveira, you physically assaulted our company's CEO. Do you have any idea how serious this is?" Marta opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish out of water. "Captain, it was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding." Carla's voice cut through the air, calm but implacable. "Is assaulting a passenger because she's black a misunderstanding?" The silence that followed was deafening. Roberto lowered his head completely. Helena stared at her hands as if she had never seen them before. Sometimes power doesn't need to shout to echo throughout a lifetime, and forever change those who dare to underestimate the strength of those who came from below. How often do we judge someone by their appearance before knowing their story? Share this video with someone who needs to understand that respect has no color. Carla stood slowly, each movement a declaration of regained dignity. The fabric of her navy blue blazer slid over her skin like ancient armor, and she adjusted her cuffs with the precision of a general preparing for a victory speech. First class had become a silent amphitheater. Roberto kept his eyes fixed on the floor. Helena wiped away tears of shame that came too late. Petrobras executives whispered among themselves, calculating the damage to their reputations. Anna had disappeared into the galley, unable to bear the weight of her own embarrassment. But it was Lucia who caught everyone's attention now. The young black flight attendant stood as straight as ever, her eyes shining with something that hadn't been there at the beginning of the flight: hope. She clutched a small diary to her chest, her fingers clasped tightly as if embracing a long-dormant dream. Marta stood motionless in the hallway, her face a mask of defeat and incomprehension. She was still trying to process how her perception of the world had crumbled in minutes. The woman she had assaulted wasn't the threat she'd imagined. She was the exact opposite of everything her prejudice had built. Eduardo maintained a military posture, but his eyes revealed something beyond professionalism. Genuine respect. It was different from the passengers' performative respect, born of fear and convenience. It was recognition of competence, leadership, and a track record. Marcus, the black lawyer, completely shut down the case and watched the scene with barely concealed admiration. He knew the weight of that moment. He knew he was witnessing something rare, a black woman occupying a position of power without asking permission, without justifying herself, simply being. Carla felt the presence of all her ancestors in that moment. The great-grandmother who was beaten for learning to read, the grandmother who was thrown out of restaurants, the mother who cleaned offices at dawn to pay for her education, all there, invisible but present, witnessing the victory that transcended individualism. "You've arrived, daughter," whispered Grandma Concison's voice in her mind. "But now you have to make way for those who come behind." It was true. That moment wasn't just about Carla Santos, CEO. It was about Lucia, who dreamed of piloting courses. It was about all the black girls who still heard they didn't belong in places like that. It was about transforming the exception into the rule, loneliness into a collective. Carla took a business card from her briefcase and handed it to Lucia. The young woman approached with hesitant steps, as if walking toward her own destiny. "Lucia, come see me on Monday. We have a civil aviation scholarship program that might interest you." Lucia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of possibility, not pain. Carla then turned to the entire first class, her voice carrying centuries of struggle and dignity. "Respect is not a favor granted, it is a right practiced." He paused, looking directly at Marta. "And when you see a black woman occupying positions of power, remember, she didn't get there by accident. She got there because her ancestors dreamed of this day. On that 3-hour flight, it wasn't just Carla who had risen, it was a whole lineage of women who could finally fly at the altitude they always deserved. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember that their place in the world isn't a favor. It's a right. Leave a comment. What was a time when you or someone close to you had to prove they deserved basic respect?